Click here to subscribe our channel. Do not forget to press the bell icon to get regular updates of free videos.
Today we'll be starting with macroeconomics. So first of all, I will be giving you just an overview of macroeconomics. Then what will be the source, previous year question paper, and then I will be starting with the content part. So the syllabus of advanced macroeconomics. Advanced macro. So it is paper 1. The syllabus of advanced macro include approaches to employment, income and interest rate determination, classical Keynesian within bracket ISLM curve, neoclassical synthesis, neoclassical theories of interest rate determination and interest rate structure. So the UPSC site basically gives the syllabus of advanced macro in paper 1. So the syllabus part of advanced macro include approaches to employment, income and interest rate determination, classical and Keynesian approach, neoclassical synthesis, neoclassical theories of interest rate determination and interest rate structure. But many things which has been asked has not been mentioned here. So there are some unwritten part as well. So first write down the detailed syllabus, what we are going to cover, from which source we will be referring. So important sources. Then we will be going by the question. So what is the weightage of macro section in paper 1, you will get to know. And then we will start with the content part. So the advanced macroeconomics, you can say it starts with the classical approach. We will be starting with the classical approach. That means you can say that entire macroeconomics is broadly divided into two parts. One is the classical or traditional approach and other is Keynesian approach. So the old economists clubbed together, they were following a certain principle. Based upon those principles, we can say that they are following the classical assumption or classical approach. So that was classical approach of income determination, classical approach of interest rate determination. But certainly there was a drawback in that classical approach. That drawback was overcome by Keynes. So the followers of Keynes, they are following a certain set of principle as propagated by Keynes. They are Keynesian economics. Nowadays many economists follow classical approach but with modification. So they are post classical or neoclassical. Some follow Keynesian but they have modified the Keynesian approach. So they are post Keynesian or neo Keynesian. So we'll start with, obviously we'll have to start with the classical approach, identify the problem that will be overcome by the Keynesian approach, that will be, you can say that it will be countered by the classical. That means classical will defend themselves, but then they will modify themselves also. They will be clubbed as a neoclassical. So it is basically, we can say that an ongoing debate. So the concept in macro evolve over time. The concept of macro is basically evolving over time. So when we are referring to the classical economist, primarily you are referring to the macroeconomics as we understood before 1936. So Keynes and the concept came after that. So pre 1936 you can say one section that will be traditional classical, after that Keynesian, or in fact both will be studied, and nowadays it is neoclassical as well as neo-Keynesian, and some are talking about the synthesis of both approach as well. That means there are some merit in classical and some merit in the Keynesian part also. So in the classical approach we will have to explain first how employment and output get determined, and then rate of interest. So there will be certain aspect here. One will be the classical aggregate supply, because to explain macroeconomics we have to derive the aggregate supply, aggregate demand, rate of interest theory, then we can explain the classical approach. So in the classical approach we have to derive first of all the classical aggregate supply, that we will be going to discuss in the first class. Then we will be deriving classical aggregate demand. So AS and AD will be two important tool. Aggregate supply and aggregate demand will be two important tool here. So we have to derive aggregate supply curve first, then aggregate demand curve. After that, in the classical approach, classical theory of rate of interest, classical theory of interest rate determination, and then we can talk about the policy implication. Policy implication, that means what will be the policy implication of policy implication on economy. So fiscal policy implication, monetary policy change implication, but to explain that we need tool, and it will be provided by aggregate supply curve, aggregate demand curve, and classical theory of rate of interest, which is known as loanable fund theory of rate of interest. These topics you should be covering from chapter number 3 and chapter number 4, mainly from Freud, Richard Freud. So main book is here, we can say for the classical approach will be the Freud. Clear? So I'm just giving an overview. It is not an exhaustive detailed syllabus, but the main things that will be explained in classical approach will be classical AS, classical AD, classical theory of rate of interest, policy implication. Within that we can also include a classical quantity theory of money. Clear? After that we will move to the Keynesian approach. Classical versus Keynesian. So in the Keynesian approach, again we have to discuss how employment and output get determined. How employment and output get determined, then how rate of interest get determined. And to determine that rate of interest, Keynesian approach basically followed ISLM tool as provided by Hansen, the curve provided by Hansen, but it is effectively being used by Keynesian approach. So in the Keynesian approach, there are in fact many questions. So one aspect will be the derivation of IS curve, equation part, its slope, shift of IS curve, then LM, its derivation, slope and shift. And remember, just this one curve is representing goods market equilibrium, another curve is representing money market equilibrium. So one IS curve is representing goods market equilibrium, income equal to spending, that is why it is IS, income equal to spending. So in the Keynesian approach we say that income is determined by spending, that is aggregate spending, consumption spending, investment spending, government spending, net export. So when Y is equal to AD, goods market is in equilibrium, that means income is equal to spending. In that way we get IS curve. We have to explain in detail. On LM curve it is money market equilibrium. L for liquidity preference, that is demand for money. M for money supply. So when money demand is equal to money supply, we have money market equilibrium. So money market equilibrium will be represented by LM curve. And when both market will be in equilibrium, then we can say that economy is in equilibrium. When both market will be in equilibrium, then economy will be in equilibrium. So in the Keynesian approach, we have to determine income as well as rate of interest, and that will be determined by intersection of IS curve and LM curve. So intersection of IS curve and LM curve will be determining income as well as rate of interest. Clear? So we have to explain, I am just giving you the perspective, what will be the content included in the Keynesian approach. So it will be the starting point, apart from the concept of multiplier, balance rate multiplier and so on. Then here also you have to explain the policy implication. what will be the effect of monetary policy change and fiscal policy change on this income and rate of interest. So when there will be fiscal changes, it will be affecting the IS curve. When there will be monetary changes, it will be affecting the LM curve. But either way, we have to determine in which case policy is effective, in which case it is not effective, in which case it is less effective, in which case it is more effective. So the Keynesian approach mainly involves the tool of IS and LM, plus there is a concept of crowding out, liquidity trap, frequently asked question we can say, and also one or two numerical part, because from last 2 year 2020 as well as 2019, in both year one numerical has been asked. You will have this topic wise question on in your account. So in 2020, this question number 4, consumption spending, investment spending, net export, autonomous taxes, income tax rate, marginal propensity to consume, etc. were given, and then we have to find certain variables. I will be solving that question when we will be discussing the Keynesian approach. And in 19 also there was a numerical question number 12. These numericals, remember, are not difficult one. These are not difficult numericals. Just you must know the step how to calculate. That's it. There is no difficulty in numerical here. So in 2019 and 2020, in both year one question has been asked. Before that, no question was asked numerically from the macro section. Clear? And number of question you can say from the macro section. You find in 2020 one question, second, third, 4 question, 5 question, and I think 2 more. So in fact 6 question, 6 parts from macro. So around 100 marks or sometimes more than 100 is from macro. In 2019 also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you can say at least 5 to 6 part is from the macro section out of that total 28 number of question. Clear? Now out of those 5 or 6 question, you will find at least I think 2 or 3 question from the classical approach and the Keynesian approach. So in the Keynesian approach, it is mainly IS and LM and determination of income and interest rate, but this will take more time as compared to classical approach, because there are many short question also involved here in the Keynesian approach. The reference for Keynesian approach, I will suggest Dornbusch and Fisher. Dornbusch and Fisher, DFS in short, Dornbusch, Fisher and Starch in fact, and 4 chapters I will say, but the numbering of chapter will depend upon the edition. So it will start with income and spending. Income and spending. In old edition it will be chapter number 3, but I think in the new edition it is chapter number 9. So you can just find that. Chapter number 4 then, money, interest and income. Money, interest and income. Then chapter number 5 is monetary policy and fiscal policy. Monetary policy and fiscal policy. And then chapter number 7 is aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So I think at least these 4 chapters you should be covering from Dornbusch and Fisher. Clear? So for classical approach, go by this. For Keynesian, you should be reading, although if you are studying it from front, no problem, but I will be referring Dornbusch and Fisher in the class. Clear? So one part will be this, second part will be this. In this first round of macro, we will be covering this classical and Keynesian version. Clear? Then obviously the current economists, those who are following classical but they have modified the classical economist, that will be part of neoclassical, and those who are following Keynes with modification are post cognition or neo cognition. That will be a separate part. So if you are writing it the exhaustive content, then one is classical, other is cognition. Third, you can say neoclassical versus neo-Keynesian. So there are certain topics like a Fooling model given by Friedman. So Friedman was basically a new classical economist. So he modified the classical. So neoclassical and neo-Keynesian, you can read chapter number 17 from Gordon. So whatever I am mentioning mainly are included in your macro material. It is there in your study material. You don't have to buy, let us say, Freund separately or Dornbusch and Fisher separately or Gordon separately. You may also read it from Freund. So Gordon and Freund both, we can say. These were the topics mentioned in the syllabus. So what is not mentioned in the syllabus is the section of inflation and unemployment. So the question related to inflation and unemployment, particularly with respect to Phillips curve, then Ocon's law, long run Phillips curve, short run Phillips curve. So concept related to inflation and unemployment. For this section, you should be preferring Blanchard, and it is chapter number 6, 7, 8 and 9. Again, these 4 chapters are included in your study material part. So one section from which you are expecting question will be the inflation and unemployment. Apart from this inflation and unemployment, there are other topic in macroeconomics like demand for money. So demand for money was also included in the classical concept, also included in the Keynesian concept, and there are some certain recent changes as well. Like in 2020, the question of there was a question. You can read question number 6. Explain how Keynesian speculative demand for money is restated in the regressive expectation model. Point out this limitation. A regressive expectation model. So this was basically a new question in 20. You know that speculative demand for money concept. You can write it from the front also. But here the question was explain how Keynesian speculative demand for money is restated in the regressive expectation model. So now the requirement of the question is that you must be knowing that a regressive expectation model. Now this regressive expectation model is the first topic when you read demand for money chapter in Branson. It discusses other models as well, but the first topic is the regressive expectation model. So those topics, you can say one part is demand for money. There are various models or theories within that. So for that purpose, read only one chapter in Branson. The scan, this chapter has been scanned and uploaded in the on the site. It is not included in your spiral. It is not included in that. But since that question has came later, so we have included and provided you the material, a scanned copy. So demand for money, then add investment part as well, and other is consumption, like current income hypothesis, permanent income hypothesis, life cycle income hypothesis, intertemporal income hypothesis. Although those question has not been asked so far, but if you are preparing for new question, since one topic has been asked this year, regressive expectation model, so you should be reading that chapter. From investment also a question was there in terms of Tobin's Q. Consumption so far has not been asked in terms of life cycle income hypothesis or permanent income hypothesis, but you should be reading, I think. So these are three chapters, I think chapter number 12, 13 and 14 from Branson. Clear? So the source for this demand for money section will be this. So in the macroeconomic section, usually you will get question from the classical approach, the Keynesian approach, that is ISLM, then from new Keynesian approach, inflation and unemployment section, Phillips curve or consolidated question, demand for money. One part of macro is also your open economy, but that is included in your international economics section. So open economy is also part of macroeconomics, but that is included in the international economics. Clear? So I think the main references, if I repeat, apart from your HLO, just remember many students are reading that. I am not saying don't read that book. You are reading it, no problem, but if you are referring to the core references, core book, then for classical I will suggest Freund. For Keynesian I am suggesting Dormouse and Fisher. For neoclassical and new Keynesian, Freund as well as Gordon. Inflation and unemployment section, you can read it from Freund also. There are certain topic in Freund explain well, but chapter 6, 7, 8 and 9 from Blanchard. There is demand for money, investment and consumption from Branson. So you can say 4 or 5 books involved in the macro section, including Freund, Blanchard, Dormouse and Fisher, Branson and Gordon. Clear? So these were the content part, references. So most of the references included in your study material, and as far as question is concerned, I said around 6 question is usually there from the macro section. So last year also, 2019 also, 2018 also, and plus one more thing, you will find that in the last 2-3 years the question in macro section is becoming more and more applied in nature. Applied means it is not that you have the ready-made answer available in the book and you just can copy there. Like the concept of multiplier is there in every book. You know the basic meaning of multiplier, you know the equation of that multiplier also. But question modified, like in all the book we assume that consumption as a function of income, but investment as autonomous. But the question was that what will be the impact on multiplier if consumption and investment both are a function of income? If both are a function of income, then what will be the impact on the multiplier? So those type of numerical, those type of applied question you must be able to attempt in exam. So I think this was the question in 2018, question number 16. In the simple Keynesian model, if consumption and investment both are function of income, how would the multiplier be affected? So obviously there will be two part of the answer. In the initial part you will say that only consumption as a function of income, then what is multiplier? So that part you are getting in the book. But if investment is also a function of income, then what will be the impact on multiplier? You have to apply that concept. In future it may say that transfer is also a function of income, then what will be the multiplier value? So if you know the concept of multiplier, if you know how to derive that equation of multiplier, then you will be able to solve any other applied question as well. Clear? So the weightage for this macroeconomics is a 6 sub part. So source you know, and the weightage around 6 question, roughly you can say 100 marks. Clear? So now we can start with the classical and Keynesian part, but before starting exactly classical model, I will give you just overview again, difference between, main differences between classical and the Keynesian approach. So you can write it in the rough, you may make it a tabular form division. Keep all those differences in mind, because that differences are in fact many, and you will be referring to those differences when we will be reading, let us say, the concept of demand for money, There also there is a difference between classical demand for money and Keynesian demand for money. The difference between aggregate supply, so there is a classical aggregate supply, classical aggregate demand. Even the role of money as explained by classical, as explained by Keynesian part. So classical and Keynesian difference is key to understand the basics of macroeconomics. So you can take a fresh page and classical approach and Keynesian approach. Remember, these are two different school of thought. That means they follow a certain principle. So all classical economists follow a certain principle. Similarly, Keynesian economists, they are following a certain set of principles. So we are basically studying what are those set of principles. But before going into the detail, just remember this classical approach is mainly a long run description of economy, and Keynesian approach is mainly short run description of economy. Classical approach is long run description, Keynesian approach is short run description of economy. So usually you will find classical concept correct in long run, and generally you will find Keynesian concept correct in the short run. So I will explain just by giving some example. In a classical approach, output is determined from supply side. So I will write output. Whenever I write Y, you can really read it with GDP or simply call it output, aggregate output of economy. So in the classical approach, output is a function of stock of capital, labor, technology and so on. So usually aggregate production function, that aggregate production function will be written in this form. So output as a function of capital and labor, it means if there will be more stock of capital, capital means here not financial capital, capital is real capital here, plant, machinery, equipment. So if there is more plant and machinery, more equipment in the economy, then economy can produce more of output. So output of economy is a function of stock of capital, labor, technology and so on. In Keynesian model, it will be written as output is determined by aggregate demand. So this approach say that this output depends upon, or it is a function of aggregate demand. So when aggregate demand will increase, there will be more output. And aggregate demand means consumption spending by household, investment spending by firm, government spending by government, and in an open economy net export also. So Y is equal to C plus I plus G. It means if there will be more government expenditure, there will be more aggregate demand and therefore there will be more output. So as there will be more aggregate demand, in response of more demand, firm will produce more of output. So demand is determining output in the Keynesian approach. In classical approach, output get determined by capital and labor. Now, what is the concept involved here of short run and long run? If I say that India's GDP in 2020-21 is more as compared to India's GDP in 1947 or 1951, and then if I ask why India's GDP is increasing or has increased, then you will say that over a period of time India has more stock of capital, more plant and machinery, more, and as a result economy is able to produce more of output. As a result economy is able to produce more of output. Now, but if when I say compare 2021 GDP with 1951 GDP, it is basically long run view of economy. But if I say that in the India's GDP in the current year is lower as compared to India's GDP of the previous year, then what is the reason? That means the slowdown of the economy. The growth rate was negative, that means India's GDP has declined in fact. But what is the reason? Obviously due to COVID, the plant and machinery, that stock has not reduced. The plant and machinery is very much there. Then what is the reason for slowdown? What is the reason for reduction of the GDP? You can say that since there is no demand for goods, therefore despite having plant and machinery, since there is lack of demand in the economy, they are producing less output, therefore GDP is falling. And you are correct, due to lack of demand there is less production, and because of less production the GDP has declined. But when you are comparing this year with the previous year, it is basically short run view. So in the short run, demand is determining the output. Lower demand means lower output. Lower demand means lower output here. So in the short run, due to lack of demand, there is lack of production. That is why you say that in order to counter this downward slow turn, government must be spending more. Because if government is spending more, then aggregate demand slow down due to lack of investment or lack of consumption can be countered. That is counter cyclical policy. So if government is spending more, then there will be more demand in the economy, and in response of more demand, firm will produce more of output. But that is precisely short run view of the economy. So the understanding of economy will become perfect only when you are able to explain what will be the impact in the short run and what will be the impact in the long run. So again I repeat, when I refer long run, then the factors more responsible for determination of output will be factors like capital, factors like labor, factors like technology and so on. But in the short run, the factors like aggregate demand, factors like consumption spending, factors like investment, that will be more important. Clear? So just keep it in mind, it is not, I am not referring to any particular question right now. Just keep it in mind that the classical approach is long run and the Keynesian approach is short run approach. One is the long run approach, other is the short run approach. Now you can say this is one important difference between classical and Keynesian. The second most important difference is that the classical economists always believed that economy is characterized by full employment. Economy is always at full employment level. So classical believe that economy is always at full employment. Economy is always at full employment. Now how that full employment is always guaranteed? The full employment is guaranteed because of wage flexibility. Full employment is guaranteed because of flexibility of wage. That means in the labor market there is full employment due to flexibility of wage. It means if demand for labor is more than supply of labor, then wage will increase immediately. If supply of labor is more, demand for labor is less, then wage will decrease immediately. So that wage change will bring equality between labor demand and labor supply. So in that sense, demand for labor is equal to supply of labor, and therefore there is full employment in the economy. So the classical belief that there is always full employment in the economy led to vertical aggregate supply curve, which means whatever be the price, the output is always at full employment levels. You can denote it by YF or you can write it Y star also. So classical aggregate supply curve is vertical line. We will be deriving this classical aggregate supply curve in this class. Okay, that will be your first class for the classical approach. So due to full employment, which is guaranteed by wage flexibility, classical aggregate supply curve is vertical line. Keynes do not agree with that concept. Keynes said that economy is usually characterized by unemployment. But unemployment means demand for labor is less and supply of labor is more. That then you only have unemployment. But why that unemployment exists in the Keynesian approach? Because the assumption made by Keynes is different. Keynes is not agreeing with this classical view that wages are flexible. Keynes said that even when supply of labor is more and demand for labor is less, unlike classical which say that wages will fall in that situation, it says that wages are rigid. So wage rigidity is the reason for unemployment, and why wages are rigid has been explained by Keynes also. Wages are rigid because of government legislation, minimum wage law, so you cannot give lower than that wage. Wages are rigid because of presence of labor union. Union will not allow wages to fall below a critical level. So there are certain reasons to say that wages are rigid, and if wages are rigid, then supply and demand for labor are not equal. So in that way there is unemployment. So classical says full employment, Keynes say there is unemployment. And in the version of pure Keynesian model, we will get aggregate supply line as horizontal. That means at same price you can produce more and more of output. You can produce more and more of output. So when we will be incorporating aggregate supply, aggregate demand, then if aggregate demand is, let us say, positioned here, the aggregate demand will only determine price. Just look at point out the difference. When I say it is vertical, it means whatever be the price, output will remain same. That means output can change. Output can change not because of change in demand, but it can change only because of change in supply. Because even if you change the aggregate demand, there is no impact on output. But in the Keynesian approach, if you draw that aggregate demand, then aggregate demand is determining output. So when aggregate demand will increase, output will increase, because Keynes says that output is determined by aggregate demand. So the approach is different. Don't start thinking that which approach is correct. Clear? Just read the two approaches separately. We will have to understand the two polar extreme right now. The reality is somewhere in between. It is neither vertical nor it is horizontal. So in between means we have to consider the classical as well as the Keynesian in the recent context, that is neoclassical or neo-Keynesian, the synthesis part. So classical aggregate supply curve and classical aggregate demand is basically determining the output and the price. So one important difference is that classical is long run concept, Keynes is short run concept. Second difference, classical say that there is always full employment in the economy, and Keynes is saying that there is unemployment in the economy. Wage flexibility is the reason here, wage rigidity is the reason here. Apart from these two, the classical economists say that you can say it is third point, that money has an important role to play, but money perform only the medium of exchange role. Medium of exchange. So as per classical economists, the role of money, the function of money is to act only as a medium of exchange. Keynes said that money is performing the role of medium of exchange, but it is also performing the role of store of value. So Keynes is not saying that classical is incorrect. Keynes is simply saying that classical were correct partly, they are not correct completely. So in the Keynesian approach, money is acting as medium of exchange as well as a store of value, and because of that, when we discuss the classical, then in the demand for money, we will say that money is demanded only for transaction purpose. Okay, when the topic of demand for money will come, you will get to know what is the meaning of transaction demand for money. Here you are just pointing out the major differences. In the classical approach, since money was acting only as medium of exchange, so demand for money is only for transaction purpose. But in Keynesian part, money is demanded for transaction purpose, plus money is also demanded for speculative purpose. Precautionary demand for money, you can say, you can ignore that part, but major two part will be transaction demand for money and speculative demand for money. So this speculative demand for money concept is mainly associated with the Keynesian part. The speculative demand for money concept was not visualized by classical. Classical always say that there is always full employment, and because they said that there is always full employment in the economy, they believed Say's law, which says supply creates its own demand. Supply creates its own demand. That means if you supply a commodity, demand for that commodity is already or will automatically be created in the economy. Supply creates its own demand. Just think how supply will create its own demand. So if there will be supply of any particular product, say if this pen is being produced, how it is creating demand for it, because in order to produce any product, the classical say that in order to produce any product you are using various factors of production, labor, land, capital, entrepreneur. To those factors of production you will be paying wage, and wages will be paid in the form of money, and money has only one role to play, and that is to act as medium of exchange. That means we will spend it for transaction purpose. But if only one pen has been produced, if you are producing this X by using various factor of production, so production generates income, and that income has to be spended. So that income will be spended on the product produced. So in that sense, supply creates its own demand. When you supply a good, that means you produce a commodity. That production is generating income, and that income will be spent for transaction purpose. That means you will be spending that income in order to buy the good. So in that sense, supply creates its own demand. Now question is, if supply creates its own demand, if this is correct, how we can explain the recession, or how you will can explain the Great Depression of 1929? It lasted for almost a decade. Because in the depression what is happening, there is production but there is no buyer or less buyer. So it was primarily because of lack of demand. Supply was there but there was no demand or less demand. So if I say that supply creates its own demand is correct, then we, by using that principle, we cannot explain the depression which prolonged for almost a decade. So there was something wrong with this concept. So in that context we can say that since 1936 Keynes has provided that explanation that why this recession prolonged, and Keynes say that supply does not create its own demand. Sometimes we hold money, we have money but we don't spend it. But when we have money and we don't spend it, we are keeping it for a speculative purpose. But that speculative demand for money was very much ignored by the classical and considered by the Keynesian approach. So Keynes, by using that speculative demand for money, explained why recession existed and persisted. So the approach of classical and Keynesian is quite different. So over a period of time we have to explain these things. Clear? So we are going to explain this classical approach and the Keynesian approach. But remember, you can understand macroeconomics better when you understood one particular model. When we are explaining one particular model, that is classical model, apply the classical principle to understand that model. Don't start applying Keynesian model, or don't start applying the real life, what you are seeing, observing, into that model. So when you are reading that classical approach, you must be familiar with the classical assumptions. When we are studying Keynesian approach, we will be explaining the Keynesian part, and when we are synthesizing both, then we can incorporate both classical as well as the Keynesian part. Clear? So that there will be different aspect involved in the classical and the Keynesian approach. So classical approach we have to start, and in this classical approach, now we are focusing mainly on the classical approach. Classical approach, and it is classical equilibrium model, we can say. So in this classical approach, we have to derive first classical aggregate supply, then we will be explaining the classical aggregate demand. By using that classical aggregate supply and classical aggregate demand, we can explain determination of output and price. So we will be deriving this classical aggregate supply. So, but whenever you draw aggregate supply in classical or in Keynesian, AS or AD, whenever you draw it, take price and output on axis. That means they are showing the relationship between price and output. So aggregate supply curve in classical approach will be vertical. We have to derive it, and it will be vertical always at full employment level. But before explaining that, I am again using certain keywords that I will be referring to, or you will be finding in that chapter 3 of Freud also. An important part in the classical approach is the classical dichotomy. Dichotomy means there is a separation. There is a separation between real variable of economy and the nominal variable of economy. I repeat, classical dichotomy is a theoretical separation between a real variable of economy and nominal variable of economy. Now question comes, what is real and what is nominal? Real means it is always in physical term, and nominal means it is in monetary term. Real means it is in physical term and nominal is in monetary term. So this pen is real. Price of this pen will be nominal. Got it? This pen is real. Price of this pen will be nominal. This class is real. Fee for this class will be nominal. That is, price will be nominal. So if I am holding 10 rupees to buy this pen, because price was 10 rupees. If price goes from 10 to 20, then I need to keep 20 rupees cash to buy the same pen. So my nominal cash balance increases from 10 to 20, but my real cash balance does not, because real means physical. So still from 20 rupees you are able to buy the same pen. So real is basically in physical term, nominal is in price term, monetary value term. So here price is on one axis, output is on horizontal axis. So one variable here is real, other is nominal, and classical say that there is a classical dichotomy. In your answer, keywords must be there, and you must, whenever you use these words, underline that and just give a short definition. That classical dichotomy is a real theoretical separation between a real variable and nominal variable. Real like output, real like employment, like real interest rate, real exchange rate, purchasing power, these are real concept. Nominal is basically in terms of price, nominal interest rate, nominal exchange rate, nominal wage. You can understand it with a better example. Suppose a wage of 100 rupees is given to worker. Now this 100 rupees will be a nominal wage. How much goods he can buy with that 100 rupees, that will be real. How much goods he can buy with that 100 rupees, that will be real. Now how much goods he can buy, that depends upon the price. So if I say that price of a product, price index is 100, then if you have 100 rupees and price is 100, you can buy 1 unit. So if that wage increases from 100 to 200 and price also doubles, then your nominal wage is increasing, not the real wage, because in real sense you are still able to buy that same quantity. So if it is nominal wage W, if you divide it by price, it will become real. So if you divide that nominal with price, you will get the real variable. So W is nominal wage, divided by price, you can call it real wage. Nominal divided by price is real, and real multiplied by price will become nominal. So if this is real, if I multiplied by price, then it will become nominal. So real and nominal are separate, which means change in real variable will occur due to change in real factors, and change in nominal variable will occur due to change in nominal factors. I repeat again, change in real factor will occur due to change in real forces, and change in nominal will occur because of change in the nominal factor, but change in nominal will not affect real. So if there will be change in one nominal, it will affect the other nominal, but it will not affect the real variable. We are getting my point? If you affect one nominal, if any variable will affect one nominal, it will affect the other nominal, but not the real one. So price is one nominal, so that nominal may get affected by other nominal like money supply, but it will not affect the real one. So if price is, let us say, P1, output is Y. If price goes up from P1 to P2, then this is change in the nominal, but nominal is not affecting the real, so output will remain same. So this output will continue to remain same, but we have to explain, it is very detailed model. So we have to entire chapter number 3 of Freund has been devoted to just explain why this aggregate supply curve is vertical. So we have to elaborate it in detail, because macroeconomics is a very wide topic now. So this classical aggregate supply curve, just remember what I said, classical dichotomy, which means there is a separation between real and nominal. Changes in nominal will affect other nominal, changes in real will affect other real, but changes in nominal will not affect the real variable. So first we have to derive this AS, then we will be deriving this classical AD from quantity theory of money. That will be discussed in chapter number 4 of Freund. Plus chapter number 4 will also include one more tool, and that tool will be classical theory of interest rate, or you can say loanable fund theory of interest rate. So whenever I say classical equilibrium model, in order to explain that model, there are 3 tools: classical AS, classical AD, and loanable fund theory of interest. By using these 3, you can answer policy implication under the classical model. That means what will be the impact when there is monetary policy used, what will be the impact in the case of fiscal policy used. So fiscal and monetary policy implication for the economy under the classical model. So read question always carefully, what question is referring to, and then use the tool as question requires. So now ignore the other aspect and just focus on one thing, that is classical AS. We are learning the tool right now to explain or understand this classical model. So to just give a recap, classical model is basically applicable in long run. It is based upon full employment, wage flexibility, supply creates its own demand, money is the medium of exchange, money is held only for transaction purpose. So these are certain principles, and those who follow those principles are the classical economists. Clear? So we can start with chapter 3 now. You can say up to this was basically the introduction part for macro. Classical model. So certain points you can write it initial part, then we can elaborate how this aggregate supply curve will be derived. So write down first the introduction part. Classical economics emerged. Classical economics emerged as revolution against revolution against a body of economic doctrine or economic principle, a body of economic doctrine known as mercantilism, known as mercantilism. Known as mercantilism. Full stop. The features of mercantilism were A. Booleanism. Underline the word Booleanism. That is a belief that wealth and power of a nation were determined by its stock of precious metals. Its stock of precious metals. Stock of precious metals. So a power of a nation is determined by the stock of precious metals like gold, silver and so on. That means a country having more stock of precious metals was considered to be more powerful according to the mercantilism. But that has been countered by the classical. Now they are saying that the power of a nation is not determined by stock of metals. The power of a nation is determined by real factors like output of economy. So if you say that US is more powerful not because of the stock of metals, it is more powerful because economy is able to produce more output. The GDP is very high, so that GDP is a real factor, that real GDP. So real factors are important, so they highlighted the role of real factors. But earlier the focus was on Booleanism. But how a country will acquire more stock of precious metals? By exporting and importing less. By exporting you are getting those precious metals and you want to preserve it, so you will not allow import to occur. But remember, open economy, there are interlinkages, so if all are not allowing import, then there will be no export as well. So that old approach was basically mercantilism. The classical model is basically countering that belief by emphasizing that real factors are more important, and then the classical model will be further modified by the Keynesian part. So first part was Booleanism. Second point, the belief in the need for state action. The belief in the need for state action. The belief in the need for state action to direct the development of capitalist system. Next paragraph. These things you just have to just keep it in mind that before classical also there was an economic principle, but it will not be required in any answer. Next paragraph. In contrast to mercantilist, classical economist emphasized the importance of real factors, underline that, importance of real factors in the determination of wealth of a nation, wealth of a nation, and they stress the optimizing tendency of, they stress the optimizing tendency of free market, optimizing tendency of free market in the absence of state control, in the absence of state control. It means actually that the classical economists believed in the free market with less regulation from government side. They believe that if you leave that market free, market itself will optimize, that means market itself will be using resources efficiently, because they believe that market itself is efficient, and if market is efficient, then there is less reason for intervening in the market. So that laissez-faire policy, least interference from government side, that was followed by the classical economist. So they believe that market is free and it is optimizing. So as I said, we have to study any model as per the assumption of that model. It may be correct, may not be correct. Obviously agar wo correct hota, then there was no need for Keynesian argument. So since classical model has certain drawback, so you can identify the drawback also. They are believing that market is free and it is perfectly competitive, but that market is not free and that market is not perfectly competitive. So when market is not competitive, you need to regulate it. So government regulation will be needed, but they believe, the classical belief is that the market is free. Next paragraph. Classical analysis was primarily a real analysis. Classical analysis was primarily real analysis. Underline the word real analysis. The growth of an economy was, the growth of an economy was a result of, growth of an economy was a result of increased stock of, increased stock of factors of production, increased stock of factors of production, and advances in technology, and advances in technology, advances in technology. That is why they said that output is a function of stock of capital, labor, technology, and so on. So this output depends upon stock of capital, labor, and technology. Next paragraph. According to classical, money played a role, money played a role only in, money played a role only in helping transactions, helping transactions. It means, next sentence, it means money only act as medium of exchange, money only act as medium of exchange. Underline that, money only act as medium of exchange. Next paragraph. Classical economists did not trust government, did not trust government and stress the harmony of individual and national interest, individual and national interest, when market was left without regulation, market was left without regulation, market was left without regulation. They thought that if individual is maximizing their own welfare, then the welfare of society and the welfare of nation is also maximized. That means market force, the market force which is guided by demand and supply, that market force is efficient. So if individuals are maximizing their own welfare, then the welfare of nation is also maximized. So they are finding that harmony between individual welfare and the national welfare. They are not citing, they are not pointing that conflict. But remember, there can be some conflict. Later on, we will be explaining it in the welfare part as well. That market is guided by the invisible hand, and that invisible hand is working. That invisible hand is basically demand and supply. So as argued by Adam Smith, that the market forces are efficient, guided by the invisible hand. So each worker maximizes their own utility, consumers maximize their own utility, firms maximize their own profit. So if all are doing optimizing their own objective, then the objective of nation is also maximized. That was the belief of the classical. So they are finding that harmony between individual welfare and the national welfare. Next part. Both the aspect of classical economics, both the aspect of classical economics, both the aspect of classical economics, that is A, stress on real factor, stress on real factor, and B, effectiveness of free market mechanism, effectiveness of free market mechanism developed in the course of controversy, in the course of controversy over, in the course of controversy over long run question concerning, long run question concerning determination of economic development, long run question concerning determination of economic development, long run question concerning determination of economic development. So it is an important question in macro. What determines economic development? And we are trying to find the answer to that question. What determines economic development? What causes that GDP to grow? But development is a wider concept than GDP. So the development aspect, first we have to explain that growth aspect, then we can move to the development aspect. But what determines that growth? What determines that GDP? What determines that development is a wider question. So as per classical, the answer is GDP or that growth is determined by real factors. The answer to that same question provided by Keynes will be that GDP is determined by demand, aggregate demand. So there are different view, different perspective. Next paragraph. Classical economists felt that free market mechanism would work. Free market mechanism would work to provide market for any goods, to provide market for any goods that were produced, simple words may it means a supply creates its own demand. In bracket you can simply mention Say's law. Therefore two features of classical analysis arises as part of attack on mercantilism, arises as part of attack on mercantilism. A, they stress the role of real factors, they stress the role of real factors, and B, they stress the self-adjusting tendency of economy, self-adjusting tendency of economy, self-adjusting tendency of economy. So economy will adjust automatically, and real factors are important in short. So I've just dictated you the initial pages, 1 or 2 pages of that from chapter number 3, so that I'm assuming that you are not reading that book now. So all informations are there now. Now in order to develop the or derive the classical aggregate supply curve, there are certain steps you can say. First I will explain the production function, then labor market equilibrium. For explaining that labor market equilibrium we need labor demand, labor supply, then determination of employment in the labor market. Employment determination will be determining the output according to the production function, and then we can derive the aggregate supply curve. So now focus on the derivation part of it. You can make this type of short subheading starting with the production function. And remember, this is the aggregate production function we are referring to. Aggregate means when I say here output, it is aggregate output of economy is said to be a function of stock of capital and employment of labor denoted by N. So it is not the entire labor force that will be determining output, it is only that part of labor force which are employed will be determining the output. So this output is a function of stock of capital and employment based upon a state of technology, a given state of technology we are assuming. If I say that the stock of capital at any given point of time is also given, then production function. So there are three variables here: output, capital, employment. I take one variable here, another variable here. So two dimensional diagram, you have taken two variable here. So I am assuming that the third variable or any other variable which may affect this relationship are assumed to remain constant. So capital is constant here. So as N will increase, that is employment, output will increase. Initially it may increase with a linear relationship, but usually in the micro we say that there is initially diminishing return, increasing return, then diminishing, finally diminishing return, but that was for one particular firm. In the aggregate, some firm may be having diminishing return, some firm may be having increasing return, so combined they may be having constant return also, that is a possibility. But the universal possibility that they will be having diminishing return. So you can just plot that relationship. Y as a function of capital which is constant and employment of labor. So this is just showing a technical relationship between input on one hand and output on the other hand. This relationship will simply say if employment of labor is N1, then how much output economy is able to produce. So if employment is N1, corresponding to that you can mark and say output will be Y1. If employment is N2, then how much output? You can mark according to the production function, you can say output is Y2. So output depends upon employment. So then question is, what determines employment? The employment will be determined in the labor market by the labor demand and labor supply. Then you can explain what determines labor demand, who is demanding that labor, how much labor they will demand, who is supplying labor, how much labor they will supply, and then the labor market equilibrium. And when we explain those labor market, just remember we have assumed that wages are flexible. That means if labor demand is not equal to labor supply, then wage will change. So we have to follow that assumption. So this is your aggregate production function. From production function you can derive marginal product also. And what is the meaning of marginal product? Marginal means additional. So additional output due to additional labor employed, additional output due to additional labor employed. तो ये marginal product of labor है, ठीक है. When you read that book, just remember MPN is nothing but marginal product. So you can simply write only MP, also marginal product or marginal product of labor. So marginal product of labor is change in output due to change in employment. That means if you find slope at any particular point, then that slope will be measuring the marginal product. So if I said that it is a straight line, if you draw corresponding to that, if aggregate production function is straight line, which means marginal product is constant, and then as slope decreases, marginal product will also decline. So this is marginal product of labor. So here you can write employment, and on vertical axis marginal product of labor. So from production function we can derive the marginal product of labor. So that tool will be used when we will be explaining the labor demand line, labor demand curve. Clear? Just give a short description for this aggregate production function. So just remember, a relationship is there. We are assuming a specific relationship, and we have taken or considered that capital is constant. So if a factor is constant, technology was also constant. So if those constant factor will change, then like stock of capital changes, then if stock of capital will change, then same labor can produce more of output. With more machinery, same labor will become more productive, so they can produce more of output. If technology improves, then also same labor can produce more of outputs, and then this production function will shift up. Relationship will be the same, but if there is change in technology, change in capital, then this curve will shift, and when this function will shift, the marginal product will also shift, because marginal product is derived, one curve is derived from one curve here. So when this curve will shift, the marginal product will also shift. Now write it. Production function summarizes the relationship between total input and total output, after comma, assuming a given technology, next sentence. The short run production function is a technological relationship. Short run production function is a technological relationship that determines the level of output, given the labor input. Full stop. The classicals assume that employment of labor is determined by forces of demand and supply, in the labor market. Underline that. Forces of demand and supply in the labor market. Next paragraph. The main features of classical labor market analysis is the assumption that market works well, that is, market is free and it is working well, and individuals optimize their objective, and they have perfect information about relevant price. So we are assuming that individuals and workers, they are optimizing their objective. That means individual is maximizing their own utility, workers are maximizing their utility from wage and income, firms are maximizing their profit, and market is working well in that respect, and they have perfect information as well about the relevant prices. Remember, these key assumptions will be challenged by has been challenged by the Keynes, and later when we will be studying the neoclassical like Friedman, they do not agree with this perfect information assumption. They follow the other aspect. They are agreeing with the other view of classical, but not with the perfect information. So they will be challenging that perfect information. Keynes will not accept that wages are flexible. Friedman will say that information is not perfect. So subsequently we will be challenging those assumptions, but right now we are assuming that those assumptions hold. So based upon those assumptions, how we can explain the model. Next paragraph. In addition, there are no barriers to adjustment. There are no barriers to adjustment of money wage. No barriers to adjustment of money wage, and market always clear. Market always clear. This line means if demand for labor is more than supply of labor, then money wage will increase. No restriction on that. If supply of labor is more than demand for labor, then money wage will fall. So market is working well, and the flexibility of wage will guarantee that this labor demand is equal to labor supply. So this is your classical view. Aggregate production function, we can say this is your one set of diagram, first diagram here. Remember, the purpose is to derive aggregate supply curve. Now what we have stated that employment is determined in the labor market by labor demand and labor supply. So for that purpose we have to explain labor market now. Labor market will have two parts. One will be labor demand and other is labor supply. Remember, labor will be supplied by workers, household, but labor is demanded by firms, and we are assuming that both will be optimizing their own objective. So what is the objective of firm? Objective of firm is to maximize the profit. So in the labor market, first focus on labor demand. Don't write, just see here. Labor market, we are discussing about labor demand. Labor is demanded by a firm, and we are saying that the objective of firm is to maximize their own profit. And you know the profit maximizing condition. You have already understood that concept in the micro section. So apply that micro to understand macro. Micro is the base for entire economics. That is why we start with the micro section. So what was the profit maximizing condition? The firm will maximize its own profit when it will produce that much output, where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. Clear? So firm is maximizing the profit, and that profit maximizing condition requires that marginal revenue must be equal to marginal cost. Clear? Plus we have assumed that market is competitive. So again recall the other feature of perfect competition. In the perfect competition, there are large number of firms. There are large number of firms in the market. We are referring to one particular firm. By stating that we are referring to one particular firm, it means if there are large number of firm and one firm was acting as the price taker. So when firm was acting as price taker, you can recall from micro part, that price itself will become the marginal revenue. So in place of that marginal revenue, you can write price. So for marginal revenue, I have written price. Now question is, what is marginal cost? Marginal cost means what? Addition to total cost due to one additional unit of output produced. I repeat, addition to total cost due to one additional unit of output produced. And what is output here? Output is Y. Y is a function of capital, which is constant, employment of labor. So if capital is constant, you can produce more output, Only by having more labor. We can produce more of output only by having more labor. But it is not that one labor produces one output. One labor may produce one output, may produce more than one output, may produce less than one output. But whatever amount of output one labor will produce, that will be called as marginal product of labor, because marginal product of labor means what? Change in total output due to change in employment. So marginal product of labor is determining how much will be the total change in total output due to one additional labor. So if I say it is a change in output is 5 because of change in employment of labor by 1, that means 1 extra unit of labor produces 5 unit of output. So question is, if one labor produces 5 unit of output, what is marginal cost of producing 1 unit extra unit of output? That depends upon wage. So if wage is say 100 per hour, labor here means in terms of hour, don't think in terms of 1%, 2%, 3%, think in terms of hour. So if I say that wage is 100 rupees for an hour, that means if labor is employed for an hour, you have to pay 100 rupees, and in 1 hour whatever labor will produce, that will be called as margin product. So if margin product of labor is 5, that means in 1 hour labor is producing 5 unit, and for that 1 hour you are paying wage of 100. So 100 rupees will be cost, labor cost for 5 unit of output. So what will be the labor cost for 1 unit of output? For 1 unit of output it will be 100 by 5, that will be 20. But if margin product of labor would have been 4, then it will be 100 upon 4. So whatever you write for marginal cost is basically wage divided by margin product of labor. You got that point? I repeat this example. If margin product of labor is 5, it means one labor is producing 5 unit, and to that one labor you are paying a wage of 100. So 100 rupees will be addition to cost for 5 unit. So for 1 unit it will be 20. So that 20 is wage divided by margin product. So for margin cost you are writing wage upon MPN. So now I can write P equal to W by MPN. You know the reason why you have written this. This is the profit maximizing condition. This price is nothing but MR, and this W by MPN is nothing but MC, margin cost. So when MR is equal to MC, the profit of firm get maximized. And you can write this equation also as W upon P is equal to marginal product of labor. Clear? And now recall what I stated in the earlier part. When you divide any number with price, it will become real. So this W by P is real wage, and only W is nominal wage. Only W is nominal wage. So you can write this equation in this form, or you may write this equation in this form also. W is equal to marginal product of labor multiplied by price. So when you multiply any number with price, you get the value of that. So this is called value of margin product. That will be equal to wage. So either you can state it in terms of nominal, or you can state it in terms of real. So firm's profit get maximized when it will employ that much of labor where marginal product of labor is equal to real wage, or value of margin product is equal to nominal wage. You can state it in any form. So the profit of firm get maximized when it employs that much of labor where real wage is equal to MPN or nominal wage is equal to VMP. And what is MPN curve? MPN curve, as you derive in the first diagram, it is negatively sloped. So question is, how much is demand for labor? That all depend upon what is the real wage. So if you write that real wage here, W1 by P1, because there are many firms in the market, so for all of them the real wage will remain same for them in the market. So if this is the real wage, profit maximizing condition is satisfied here, because only at that point MPN will be equal to W by P. So in that case demand for labor we can say is N1. But if real wage is lower, like this, then profit maximizing condition is satisfied here. Demand for labor will be N2. So this is one point, this is second point. If you connect those points, then you get demand curve for labor, but that curve is coinciding with MPN. So just remember one line. In the classical labor market, marginal product of labor curve is the demand curve for labor. I repeat, in the classical model, assuming that market is competitive, marginal product curve of labor is the demand curve for labor. So this is demand curve of labor. You have derived one section, one part, but employment does not depend only on demand. Employment will determined by demand and supply equality. So this is one section. When we will add that labor supply, then you can explain how employment get determined in the labor market. Clear? These numerical description is you have to write it in your notebook, but not necessary to show all those facts. Even if you know from this section, what is important is that you must know why labor demand curve is marginal product of labor curve, why MPN curve is labor demand curve. That is the only key thing that you will be referring to in the future topic. And why we are referring it, profit maximizing condition is this. So you know why price equal to W by MPN. This price is MR and this is your marginal cost. So by when you equate marginal revenue with marginal cost, then the profit of firm get maximized. Clear? So up to this, just write it briefly. Labor determined by, labor is rather demanded by, labor is demanded by firms, and competitive firm will always produce that much output. Competitive firm will always produce that much output where its own profit get maximized, So the condition for short-run profit maximization requires that. The condition for short-run profit maximization requires that MR is equal to MC. First write that. MR equal to MC. Full stop. Since MR is equal to price, and marginal cost, and MC is equal to W by MPN. So now this. So P equal to W by MPN. So P equal to W by MPN or W by P equal to MPN. This example just helps you to know why we are referring marginal cost as equal to W by MPN. Next paragraph. Thus the profit maximizing quantity of labor demanded, profit maximizing quantity of labor demanded by a firm, at each real wage is given by equality of W by P, that is real wage, and MPN, W by P and MPN. So that is why MPN curve is called labor demand curve. MPN curve is called labor demand curve. You know that labor demand curve is MPN curve. So when you write W by P on axis, then show it as MPN. When you write only nominal wage, then write it as a VMP. Clear? It all depends upon what you are writing on the axis. Since it is a real analysis, so better to write in real form. So this is one section. The second is labor supply. But who supply labor? Household or worker. And how much labor they will supply? Obviously labor workers are not working for 24 hours. So labor derive their utility from income which they will earn by working, but to work more they will have to sacrifice leisure, and they derive utility from leisure as well. Leisure, that is free time not working. Labor supply. Again this labor is being supplied by worker or household, you can say. You can understand it in this form. I am writing here leisure, and on right side I am writing work in terms of hour. Both are in terms of hour. So if I write here any particular point like 24, so each person is endowed with or having 24 hours for leisure as well as for work. And if you mark any point like if you write here 8, so you have to rate it in this form. 8 hour is leisure because you are writing leisure on the axis. 8 hour is leisure, so remaining 16 hour for work. When you write here 16, it means 16 hour for leisure, 8 hour for work. So when you take this 24, it means entire 24 for leisure. But if entire 24 for leisure, then income will be 0. You can take here income. If you take here 0, then 0 is for leisure, entire 24 for work. So if entire 24 hour is used for work, your how much income you can earn, that depends upon the wage rate. So if wage rate is 100 rupees, then 2400. So in that way it will be 2400. So what will be slope of this line? Slope is measured by this angle. So slope will be 2400 upon 24, that is 100. So slope of this line is nothing but wage. So we have assumed a certain wage. So if I write here wage, again you can interpret it in terms of real. So if you are writing a real wage, then based upon that real wage, how much is work, that depends upon utility. And individual and worker is deriving utility from work, utility from leisure as well as utility from income. So you are using that indifference curve analysis. So utility get maximized. So if I write it as a 10, it means what? 10 hour used for leisure, so remaining 14 hour used for work. So at this wage 14 hour is used for work. You have 1 point. These numbers are arbitrary numbers. If wage increases, then what will be the outcome? From 100 to let us say 200. Then by working 24 hour, now instead of 2400, person can earn 4800. Time will remain same. So slope of this line is measuring the new wage rate, W2. Now as wage rate will increase, there will be in fact two effects, substitution effect and income effect. When wage rises, leisure becomes expensive because wage rate is opportunity cost of leisure. So if workers are paid 100 rupees as wage, it means for working an hour you are getting 100. So if you are not working, how much you are sacrificing? 100. Now if wage is 200, then if you are not working you are sacrificing 200. So at a higher wage, leisure becomes expensive. So persons have less leisure and more work. But at the same time, when there will be more income due to more work and a higher wage, then person will prefer to have more of normal goods, and normal is leisure, not work. We prefer more leisure. So as income increases, we prefer to have more leisure, but you can have more of leisure only when you work less. So both substitution effect and income effect are working in opposite direction. Both these effects are working in opposite direction. But we assume that since it is macroeconomics, we are assuming that if you have to derive it in the micro, this topic will be discussed in micro as well. Then for in micro, the labor supply curve will be bending backward. That means up to a wage, certain wage, up to a certain wage, it will be increasing, and then it will decrease. But in macro, we are assuming that at a higher wage, economy will always get more and more workers who are ready to work. So if you are showing it as only positively sloped, then how to mark here? From 14 to, let us say, is working for 16 hours. So if he is working more, his laser must be lower. You can draw it to the left, showing that laser has decreased and work has increased. The important point is this, not this one. Important point is that labor supply curve is positively sloped. So you know that labor demand, you know this labor supply. When you integrate both, then we will determine employment, and that employment will determine output. These are the tools you should be referring to. So you can read that chapter, but don't get in too much involved into that technicality. Simply say that labor supply is being done by the workers, and they will be supplying that much of labor where their own utility get maximized. Clear? So write it in short. Labor is supplied by individual workers. So classicals assume that individuals attempt to maximize utility. And it depends positively on real income and leisure. Positively on real income and leisure. Full stop. Supply curve is positively sloped. Assuming that substitution effect is dominating the income effect. So labor supply is a positive function of real wage. So it is a positive relation. Labor supply is a positive function of real wage. Labor demand is a negative function, but labor supply is a positive function of real wage. Clear? Now incorporate three diagrams you have drawn now. One was aggregate production function, second was labor demand, and third is labor supply. Incorporating all, now we can determine employment, output, as well as we can derive the aggregate supply line. Clear? So now what I am writing is the more important part. So in most of the question will be using this set of diagram in the classical aggregate supply curve derivation. Determination of employment, output, and not price exactly, determination of employment and output, you can say. And we are deriving in fact aggregate supply curve. So you can draw three diagram here in this format. In this part we will be deriving the aggregate supply curve. So if you are drawing aggregate supply curve, what you will write on axis? Price and output. Here we have to present aggregate production function. So production of Y was a function of employment, and that production function was a function of stock of capital, which was constant, and employment of labor. In this part we have to draw labor demand and labor supply. So it is labor demand and labor supply, but labor demand was a marginal product of labor curve, MPN, and labor supply just derived was positively sloped. So their equality will be determining full employment. So you can write it NF or N star you can now, and that will also determine the real wage W1 by P1. So this is labor market equilibrium. Remember, we have written certain condition now. Production is a function of capital and employment of labor. Labor demand is a function of a real wage but inversely related, negative. Labor supply as a function of real wage but positive. And for labor market equilibrium, labor demand must be equal to labor supply. And you know, if they are not equal, then wage will continue to change. So if they are not equal, then wage will continue to change. Clear? So from labor market, draw this labor full employment. This full employment of labor will produce how much of output? That will be determined by production function. So that will be YF. So first determine the employment here. That employment will be determining the output. Now plot this output YF, and this you have taken it at a constant number. So price is a constant number here. So consider that price here. So combine that price P1 and output YF. Take this point. But to draw any curve, we need the second point. Now if I say that price is now P2 instead of P1, that means it is higher. Just focus on diagram here. If price is P2 instead of P1, that means at a higher price. So when price will increase, what is the impact on this real wage? It will fall. So given a nominal wage W1, as this price will increase, this real wage will fall. That means it will be at a lower point. But at any real wage lower than that, labor supply is less and demand for labor is more. But we are following classical model, and in the classical model, labor market is always in equilibrium. That means there is always full employment. And how it is guaranteed? It is guaranteed due to flexibility of wage. So if labor supply is less and labor demand is more, then wage will increase. So this wage W will continue to increase. This W will increase, and it will continue to increase so that labor market attains equilibrium at same point. So what will happen, that as price rises from P1 to P2, this wage will also rise, and it will rise in the same proportion, so that the real wage will remain same. I said change in nominal will not affect the real. So price is one nominal factor. W is another nominal factor. So both nominal increases in the same proportion, so that the real will remain unchanged. So as price increases, real wage initially fall. Due to disequilibrium in the labor market, nominal wage will increase. Full employment will be maintained at same level. Output will remain at same level. So although price increases, but output will remain same. You have second point. You can repeat that for next level of price, but again you will find that third point here. So when you connect all, this will be the classical aggregate supply curve, which is vertical. Classical aggregate supply curve, which is vertical, highlighting the classical dichotomy, that the real and the nominal are separate. So change in nominal is not affecting the real, which is output. Change in price will not affect the output. So in that way, classical aggregate supply curve is vertical. Clear? So it is derived from that labor market equilibrium based upon certain key assumptions, that output is a function of capital and labor. Labor demand curve is marginal productivity curve. Labor demand is always equal to labor supply. If they are not equal, then wage will continue to change. Clear? So we have to explain basically this part. But just remember, when we draw this aggregate supply curve vertical, we have assumed certain factors as constant. So there are certain factors. If they will change, then aggregate supply will shift. The shape will remain same, but it can shift to the right or it can shift to the left. But it will shift when there will be change in some real factors like technology, real factors like productivity, real factors like real capital stock. Just for example, if technology improves, then what will happen? If technology will improve, then same employment of labor can produce more of output. So everything will remain same, but same labor can produce more of output. So output will change to the right. So this aggregate supply curve will shift to the right. So there are various factors that will cause shift of aggregate supply curve. There are some factors that will not cause shift of aggregate supply curve. And what will cause shift and what will not cause shift, we have to explain that part. So the question may be in the applied section also. Remember, the question could be in the applied part as well. So just write up to this part. In this model, real output, comma, employment and real wage, real output, employment and real wage are endogenous variable. Underline the word, are endogenous variable, which means they are determined within the model. They are determined within the model. They are determined within the model. In classical model, the factors which determine output, are those factors that determine position of labor demand, comma, labor supply and aggregate production function. If price increases from P1 to P2 as shown in diagram, we are referring to this, as price increases from P1 to P2, then with a given nominal wage, a real wage will fall. With a given nominal wage, real wage will fall. As a result, there will be excess demand for labor. So labor demand is more, labor supply is less. Excess demand for labor. Since classicals believed in wage flexibility, so nominal wage will increase. In the same proportion, so that a real wage remains same, and full employment and output remains at same position or same level. Next sentence, this implies that output remains at same level despite increase in price. Next sentence, this also explains classical dichotomy that change in price which is a nominal variable is not affecting real variables like output, real variables like output or real wage or real wage. So this is derivation of aggregate supply curve. Now the remaining part of this chapter also goes on to explain what are the factors that will cause shift of aggregate supply curve. That means which factor will affect output and which factor will not affect output. So you have to be very clear which factor will affect output and which factor will not affect output. Since output is real, so certainly it will be affected by the real factor and it will not be affected by the nominal factor, but we have to list it down. So the remaining part of this chapter will be this. Sometimes question will also be applied in this part as well. I think in 2017 or 18 there was a question of wage rigidity, but sometimes you will get very direct question also like this. In 17, show that full employment is the logical conclusion of classical macroeconomic model. This one 2017 question. 24, explain how the employment and real wage would change in a typical classical model. In the event of increase in supply of labor, money wage becomes rigid. So remember, the question is referring to the classical model, but the question has modified the classical assumption. Classical model believed wage flexibility, but question says money wage becomes rigid. So what will be the impact? Rigidity of wage was a feature of Keynesian model. So we have to explain the classical model with Keynesian assumption. So in the event of increase in supply of labor, so what will happen in this? To answer this type of question, you have to explain the basic part of the classical model, but if I draw this production function, labor supply, labor demand, question says there is increase in labor supply, so this labor supply shifts to the right. Increase means that if you determine the equilibrium, you will be getting equilibrium here, but equilibrium will be at a lower real wage. Now that lower real wage can be because of change in wage or because of change in price, but in the classical model we will find that price will get determined by quantity of money. That will be explained in the subsequent class. Money will determine price, not any other factor. So since there was no reference of change in money, so we cannot change that price. And question says that wage is also rigid. So what will happen? You can't change P, you can't change W, which means there will be a gap. Labor supply is more and labor demand is less. So labor supply is more than labor demand. In that way there will be unemployment in the labor market, and we are getting this unemployment in the labor market because we are following Keynesian assumption. The question say that money wage becomes rigid, so we are answering that classical model with Keynesian assumption. There will be some questions applied like that. So we have not finished this chapter number 3 completely, but we can say 80% of that chapter has been covered. So classical aggregate supply curve we have just derived this part, vertical line. But to explain the classical model, we need other two tools, classical AD as well as classical theory of rate of interest. So we'll be continuing with this classical AS. After completing this, we'll be moving to the classical aggregate demand and then to the classical theory of rate of interest. So you can refer chapter number 3 for this class and answer 1 or 2 questions if possible. But after 2 or 3 class, we'll be completing this classical approach in I think 3 class will be good enough to justify. So 2 more classes for the classical approach, starting with this and the next chapter. 2 chapter mainly, chapter number 3 and chapter number 4 we have to discuss. Clear? I think I have explained all those topics involved, the perspective involved in the macro there are certain topics like classical, complete, Keynesian, then neoclassical, neo Keynesian, inflation, unemployment, then investment, demand for money, and consumption section. And the main sources are Freund, Blanchard, Dornbusch and Fisher, some chapters from Branson, and Gordon. Clear? So we'll continue with this. Thank you.